Your position?
My name is Shawn Dunning, and I'm the director of the Leadership Wisdom Initiative at Search for Common Ground. I took an interesting path. I went into my undergrad in engineering. Okay. I was fascinated by problem solving, by figuring things out, taking things apart, seeing how they work, and trying to fix them. And that was an interesting hobby, but when I got to college and actually started studying that, I found it really wasn't that interesting. And so literally my sophomore year in college, I opened up the college catalog, the course book, and started searching for majors. And I came across communication. And for some reason it resonated. It just struck me that it was something far more challenging than building better bridges and brake pedals. But how do people interact, how do people get along, and make sense of the world around them. And I was amazed to come upon the website, simple, rudimentary website for ICAR. But when I came to ICAR, not only was it the first in the world to push this kind of discipline at a high academic level, but I was struck by the way ICAR defined the purpose. Mm-hmm. ICAR was founded in, 1982? Early 80s, and so it's about 30 years now that conflict analysis and resolution as an academic discipline has even been defined, and yet the fundamentals involved in this surely have been around for ages. We haven't focused. We haven't, as a society, taken this seriously as something to focus on. Granted, this all sounds very wishy-washy and very kind of, bleeding heart liberal, etc., etc., but I'm also pretty, realistic about this. So when I pose the question, why can't we find a way to get along more globally, the way that we learn to get along in communities? Mm-hmm. It was really a challenge I posed to myself to go after. Growing up, we hear our parents say, if children are fighting, they say, don't fight. Find a way to work it out, get along. Mm-hmm. And yet we turn on the TV and what do we see, in Afghanistan in the 80s? What do we see with the whole, I grew up in the Cold War and was, I said I haven't experienced any trauma, but maybe to some extent I did grow up in this context of wondering if World War III would take place someday, Mm-hmm. I was getting all these ideas about how can we find ways for people to meet one another. Because when you actually encounter the other, depending on how that encounter goes, it can completely transform your perception, dispel stereotypes, etc., and make it humanizes people to meet them. I started finding that there was a natural confluence between two areas of my life that became very natural to me and were very deeply ingrained in who I am and what I know. Mm-hmm. And it might seem like kind of a strange connection, but it was on one side outdoor, adventure-based, experiential learning. There's this whole thread of doing, ropes courses and going on, expeditions, and rock climbing and kayaking, and mm-hmm. It's just a big part of my life that has taught me a lot about attitude and about that anything is possible, really. Mm-hmm. But then on the outset, that sounds very naive. But when you do this through very physical, adventure-based approaches, you learn, through climbing a mountain, you get to the top and you look down and you realize that your mind at one point had said that was impossible. And yet you tried it and something pushed you through. And these very real, kinesthetic experiences teach us that we are capable of more than we can perceive. And that's so relevant to conflict, because so much of the time when we do resort to force, I don't believe people really want to. I believe it's what they feel they have to do because mm-hmm. It's what they know. Because they can't imagine, they can't perceive something that would actually work. And so they resort to force. So this idea of potential realization through adventure-based approaches was something that led me in my life to make, hey, I moved to Washington, D.C. without even being accepted. Mm-hmm. I knew there was going to be a way, and you had to believe it. So that was one area, and the other area was the side of facilitation and mediation and principles of conflict resolution and the importance of of empathy and good old-fashioned interest-based negotiating and these concepts, I started marrying them together at kinesthetic approaches to learning. Actually, by moving, by doing something together in a way that's a positive shared experience, you actually encode these lessons in a way that you can't truly understand just by sitting and thinking about it. So, granted, there sounds a little bit of a disconnect between a traditional mediation and some adventure-based approach, but it all depends on what you're trying to get out of it. So, if you're trying to develop some relationship to increase the level of trust, to increase the level of humanizing the other so that you can start to work on solutions together, the purpose of a kinesthetic, adventure-based approach there would really be to have a positive shared experience. So it might not include much discussion. It might not include addressing the conflict at all. It's just really having fun together, to put it simply. If the intent is, maybe you've got people who get along well, but they haven't, they don't have the skills to really problem solve together. So in that case, you might focus less on the relationship building and more on some sort of trial and error type of, sometimes team building initiatives, things like problem solving scenarios where you have to work together and practice approaches to communicating effectively and problem solving. And then from this, with an appreciative inquiry approach, you learn what works, and the idea is then through experiential learning you apply that to where it really matters. And I can give examples of where this has worked. And then thirdly, viscerally, kinesthetically encoded, when you do something where you trick yourself. Rock climbing is a great example. You look at, I love working with beginner rock climbers, because you get them suited up in their harness and rope, and you've got a rope, and so you're safe. If you fall, you're not really going to get hurt, but there's still a perception that something's not possible. So imagine you're standing at the bottom of a cliff, and you've determined a lot of research about this with explanatory style and learned optimism and things like this. But if you believe that there's a way, even though you can't see it, if you look at a mountain and look at Mount Everest, and you believe that there's got to be a way to the top, and you look at all your climbing partners and you say, does anyone know the way? And no, nobody knows the way. But you believe it's there, and so you start working towards it. And I believe so much of our field, that's what we're doing, and what we have to do. And so for me, coming into this with the experience of a lot of adventure-based learning, and it's not about the thrill. I mean, I started rock climbing when I was 13, and a year later I got bored with it. But the reason I stayed with it is because of the attitude training. Time and time again, when I would sense that I was about to fall, but I would overcome that, and I would keep going, and every time that happened, it encoded within me this core belief that things are possible even though you can't see it. And so I really enjoy bringing other people into those kinds of experiences. And that all comes back to the potential realization. When you have an experience on which you can reflect and realize that at one point you didn't think it was possible and yet you did it, that teaches you something. And using the experiential learning cycle, if you then apply that back into conflict, it helps people approach conflict in a way that says, well, gosh, you and I have this problem, and for the life of me, I don't see a way out of this. So you have a choice there. You can use force, which a lot of people do. So I'm just going to take it. I'm going to rally support, and I'm going to do this by force. Or you can acknowledge that you don't know the way, and you can enter into a new process with your adversary, as it were, and try to find a creative solution. Good old, Bill Urey, getting to yes. Pretty simple concept, but let me tell you, the idea of separating positions from interests is profound when people have never thought about it before. And I can't tell you how many groups I've worked with where we get to a point where it doesn't seem like there's anything possible, any possible solution. And then you start to separate positions from interests. You start to consider, why is it that you really want that? Why is it that you really want that? And you find creative ways where everybody gets what they need. Mm-hmm. So, you know, interest-based negotiating is one approach. There are many others. But the point is, you need to believe that there's a way, even though you can't see it.